Welcome back to another episode of the Unathletic Podcast with yours truly. Thank you for tuning in again. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also hit the notification button so that you don't miss out on any content from the podcast. Today, on this week's episode of the Unathletic Podcast, I want to talk about the Eastern Conference and Western Conference Finals series. Also want to address the NBA Draft Lottery. And then to close out today's episode, I'm also going to discuss Nick Saban's comments on the NIL, which for those who don't know is name, image, and likeness. All right, so let's get right into it. First, let's talk Western Conference Finals with the Golden State Warriors and the Dallas Mavericks. The Golden State Warriors lead the series right now 1-0. Game one, the Warriors did win 112-87. Andrew Wiggins put up 19 points, 5 rebounds, 1 block, and 1 steal. Stephen Curry put up 21 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 assists. So double-double for Stephen Curry, and then pull off the bench, put up 19 points. And for the Dallas Mavericks, we had Luka put up 20 points, 7 rebounds, but also had 7 turnovers. We had Spencer Dinwiddie, who put up 17 points off the bench, and then we also had Jalen Brunson, who put up 14 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists. Now, for me, in Game 1, what I thought was interesting, because, again, for me personally, Game 1 in the playoffs is always a fill-out game. I don't like to overreact to what I see in Game 1 more times than not, because teams will always adjust from game to game. And so, but particularly in Game 1, what I saw, specifically, let's start with the Golden State Warriors. What I really liked that I saw was that I felt that the Warriors did a great job, especially Steve Kerr in particular, did a great job in kind of throwing different defenses and defensive coverages at Luka Doncic. A lot of the conversation across the media and even in the world of fans was, how are the Warriors going to guard Luka Doncic, and who is going to guard Luka Doncic? At the end of the day, Steve Kerr decided to throw different coverages at him. At one point in time during the game, he had a box and one thrown at Luka. They also did some zone action against Luka, where they disguised the coverage so that you couldn't tell initially what they were getting into. I thought that was very clever on Steve Kerr's part. There's also the fact that I loved personally what I saw from Andrew Wiggins when he was guarding Luka Doncic, because as cerebral as Luka Doncic is as a player, and he uses certain moves to manipulate the defense, I like the fact that Andrew Wiggins did not bite on a lot of Luka Doncic's pump fakes. I like the fact that he stayed down to the ground and that he did not fall for anything, and that he did not foul Luka on defense. And I think that was one thing that actually intrigued me very much about the Warriors playing defense, was that they weren't fouling on defense, because that's been a trend for the Warriors. Like throughout the playoffs and throughout the regular season, they have a bad habit of really fouling on defense and being foul prone on defense. But they did a great job in forcing Luka to get the ball out of his hands. And, although to this point too, that Dallas, the others on their team did not hit their shots like they normally do, one thing that was concerning for me is the fact that, the Warriors did kind of leave the others wide open. So that was a bit of a concerning factor. I also think that the fact of the matter is that the Golden State Warriors are going to make adjustments, as well as the Dallas Mavericks. I thought what was interesting for the Dallas Mavericks was the fact that they seemed to be very keen on settling for jumpers. Like, they shot a lot of threes. They missed a lot of them, but they shot a lot of threes, and I thought that was interesting because I figured they would throw some more kind of variety into their shot selections, especially against the Golden State Warriors. But surprisingly, that wasn't the case. So I think that for me personally, as far as adjustments that are going to be made, I think for the Warriors, I think they're going to keep their same defensive philosophy. I don't see Steve Kerr kind of going away from that necessarily. I think that him continuing to disguise coverages and, having Andrew Wiggins play the kind of defense that he played on Luka is going to be something that they're going to keep going with until, Dallas kind of forces them to do otherwise. And as far as Dallas is concerned, I think that offensively, they're going to change a lot of things that they want to do. I think they're going to probably try to get guys more involved. And I think they're going to also try to make sure that, like, there's not a bunch of threes getting shot. Because at the end of the day, that's not really a winning formula, in my opinion. I don't think that Dallas could win this series by trying to outshoot the Warriors from three. I just think that there's other ways you can attack the Warriors defensively in order to work that to Dallas's advantage. And, it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of this series adjusts as far as Jason Kidd, who throughout these playoffs has done a great job actually adjusting to opponents in each series and adjusting to his circumstances in each series. So now we're gonna flip to the Eastern Conference Finals with Boston and Miami. That series is now currently tied as we speak. It is tied 1-1. Game 2, Boston won 127-102. Marcus Smart returned, as well as Al Horford, for the Boston Celtics. Smart, in his return, put up 24 points, 12 rebounds, and 12 assists, and 9 rebounds. He came up one board short of a triple-double. Jaylen Brown put up 24 points and 8 rebounds. And Jason Tatum put up 27 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. And then Jimmy Butler for Miami put up 29 points and 6 rebounds. Victor Oladipo and Tyler Hero off the bench, respectively, put up 14 and 11 points for both of them. Now, what I think was intriguing with this Boston-Miami series is the fact that, for me personally, initially, when I looked at this series and the matchups, I gave Boston the advantage. Why? Because I feel like both teams are very strong defensively, but I gave Boston the edge offensively due to the fact that I like the effectiveness of Jason Tatum on offense. I think Jaylen Brown, them two give you an edge offensively. And then also the fact that they have Al Horford, who's been productive throughout these playoffs, and he's shown up for them in different spots in these playoffs. And I think that Boston has the edge offensively over the Miami Heat, who, in my opinion, have a lot of role players. And then there's Jimmy Butler, who's performed admirably in these playoffs. But I still give Boston the advantage in this series just due to the fact that I believe they have two athletic two-way wings who can get it done on both ends of the floor. And then also, like I said, the front court depth and having Al Horford, who has produced in each series for the Boston Celtics. I think from this point forward, this series will be tight. Again, it is tied now 1-1. Miami won game 1, obviously, against Boston without Marcus Smart and Al Horford, which made a major difference. Initially, when I found out the news that Marcus Smart and Al Horford would be out, Marcus Smart due to a mild mid-foot sprain injury, and then also you had Al Horford, who was out due to health and safety protocols. That was my biggest concern, because I thought that there was a legit possibility that Al Horford would miss potentially 3 games, because the NBA changed their protocols and followed the CDC guidelines, which meant that there was a possibility that Al Horford would be out for 5 days, which meant that because the conference finals is having games every other day, that Al Horford would potentially miss out on at least 2, if not 3 games. He only missed out on 1 and was able to, I believe, what happened was that Al Horford tested negative twice in 24 hours, which is why he was able to play in game 2. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's how it works. But again, Very, very interesting series. It's going to be tight throughout. I do believe that Boston pulls it out, though, and wins the series and then punches their ticket to the NBA Finals. So that's going to be intriguing there. Now, let's go ahead and move on forward. We're going to talk NBA Draft Lottery. Let's turn our attention to that. That did take place this week. And congrats to the Orlando Magic, who was awarded the #1 overall pick. The curious thing, though, right, with the Orlando Magic, if you do follow the draft process and you know about the 3 top draft prospects for this NBA draft this year in 2022, they all 3 are front court bigs. They're front court players. It's Chet Holmgren from Gonzaga University. You have Pablo Banchero from Duke, and then you also have Jabari Smith Jr. from Auburn as well, right? And so I think what's interesting for the Orlando Magic is they're kind of in a weird position right now because they have a logjam in their front court. They have Mo Bamba, who is going to be a free agent, but you have him. You got to make a decision on whether you want to bring him back. You have Bol Bol, who is on their roster as well, an intriguing prospect that came into the league that, hasn't really carved out a spot yet or carved out even a rotation spot yet necessarily. But, they have them on their roster. They also have Wendell Carter Jr., who played well this season as well, and he actually came into his own. So it's interesting to see, he was playing well for them and showed what he was capable of, and there's potential there with Wendell Carter Jr. And then you also have Jonathan Isaac, who's been out for 2 years due to injuries. And, before his injuries, Jonathan Isaac was showing his chops as a defensive-minded forward and somebody that I believe Orlando was very high on and interested in seeing what he's capable of doing alongside potentially a Mo Bamba or even a Wendell Carter Jr. And then you also have Robin Lopez, who I imagine is going to be a free agent and probably doesn't factor too much into this equation. But the fact of the matter is that the Orlando Magic do have a logjam in the front court. And from what I've read in articles, the 2 guys that Orlando is kind of circling around for the #1 pick are Chet Holmgren and Jabari Smith Jr. Now, for me personally, I think the better fit would be Jabari Smith Jr. But again, got a lot of 4 or 5 power forwards and centers on their roster. So I believe that Orlando has a decision to make because you're going to have to move some of these guys, and you're also going to have to make a decision as far as who are you going to make the building block of your team? Who are you going to trade? Because they're going to have to trade guys. There's going to be some guys they're going to have to let go in free agency and let them, find new places to be. In my humble opinion, I think that if I were the Orlando Magic, I would suggest that you draft Jabari Smith Jr. and you potentially are going to have to let go of maybe a Jonathan Isaac who, again, because of the fact that he is been out for injury for 2 years, I think there's a legit market that you could have for him. He probably doesn't get traded immediately like in the offseason. I think that that's something that may happen in season next year just because you do want to see what he's going to look like when he gets back on the court. I think that's something that teams are going to want to look at. They're not just going to trade for him with him being out for 2 years due to injury. I think another thing to keep in mind is that Jonathan Isaac also is not vaccinated. I'm not going to go into too much detail with that. Just going to leave it at that. He is not vaccinated, and that is going to be a factor as to where he could potentially end up if he is traded by the Orlando Magic. Again, this is my own opinion. I do believe that the Orlando Magic should trade Jonathan Isaac because I believe Jabari Smith has a higher ceiling on both sides of the floor. And then also with the draft lottery, I want to also bring up the fact that the winner of the lottery, in my opinion, was actually the Oklahoma City Thunder, who were awarded the number 2 and number 12 picks in the lottery. I think that's fantastic for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And with their current roster, in my opinion, I feel at the number 2 spot, the best fit for them would be Chet Holmgren out of Gonzaga. Reason being is because I think that with Chet Holmgren and his skill set and just coming into his rookie season, what would be best for him is to play with guys who are playmakers, who will get him the ball in spots that are advantageous for him so that he can be productive on the floor. And with the Oklahoma City Thunder having Josh Giddey, who will be a sophomore next season, showing his chops as a playmaker and a premier playmaker at that, as a young guy in the league, I think works advantageously for Chet Holmgren. We also take into consideration the fact that he'll be playing with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as potentially, I'd say, a second option on offense. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a very skilled player, and he also is a solid playmaker. So I think that that would be a great fit for Chet Holmgren. He'd be able to develop and grow with a team that has a lot of young players and that is not necessarily in a position to be rushing anything. I think they're in a slow develop and growth phase, which I think fits perfectly as an environment for Chet Holmgren. Now, we're going to go ahead and move on. To close out this week's episode, I want to discuss the comments made by Nick Saban from Alabama on the NIL. And again, for those who don't know, that is name, image, and likeness. If you want to watch the press conference to hear what Nick Saban had to say in totality, I will put the link in my bio, or in my description, excuse me. So check that out if you want to see everything that he said. But I did write down some quotes from his press conference, and we're going to get into that now. Directly the quotes that were talked about and that had created a story was Nick Saban basically making accusations towards Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, as well as Dion Sanders and Jackson State, which is a HBCU, by the way, for those who don't know. These are the following quotes from Nick Saban at a press conference. Nick Saban said, and I quote, "We were second in recruiting last year. A&M, Texas A&M to be specific, was first. A&M bought every player on their team." Then Saban goes on to say, "Jackson State paid a guy $1 million last year that was a really good Division I player to come to school, ... and bragged about it, and nobody did anything about it." Now, my issue, just so this can be known now, my issue with what Nick Saban said is that there's a little bit of hypocrisy, and for me, it's a little bit of low-hanging fruit as well as kind of first world crybaby kind of problems. Because my issue is that for Nick Saban, someone who has been dominant in the world of college football, he's coached Alabama for years, and just throughout my lifetime, he's made the Alabama football program the program to go to in the NCAA. Like literally, they're always in conversations for the college football playoffs. They're always in position to get the best recruits. They always tend to have a top recruiting class, whether it's number 1 or it's somewhere in the top 5. It's very rare that I've ever seen the Alabama football team to have a bad recruiting class. Like, I don't understand the commentary on why he decided to throw these shots at a Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, as well as a Dion Sanders and Jackson State University. For me, it just smacks of a lot of hypocrisy. And I think there's another issue at hand that I want to get into as well. the fact of the matter is that I find it highly ironic that somebody like a Nick Saban wants to complain about the fact that the NIL has been such a problem. And he kind of framed it in the sense of talking about how the NCAA has been put into a kind of not a bad, I'd say a bad spot, where, you know, guys want to transfer and the NIL and things of that nature because there were issues with the whole idea of trying to pay student athletes, and because they ran into a lot of issues and then a lot of these like kind of red tape issues with paying student athletes, they decided to allow student athletes to be able to get deals from different companies based on their name, their image, and their likeness. Now, do I personally have a problem with the name, image, and likeness? Absolutely not. Because at the end of the day, I was someone who sat there when they were talking about paying college athletes. I thought that was a bit of a slippery slope, because the problem you run into is that every institution, every college, every school has multiple sports programs, and all these sports programs aren't created equal at every school. Some of these programs bring in more money than others. Some of these programs are non-revenue programs where they don't generate a lot of revenue for schools. So you run into the issue of who gets the bulk of the money, right? And what happens when certain people don't get any money or don't receive as much as others? You run into that problem. And so they decided to allow student athletes to be able to make money off of their name, image, and likeness, which to me is reasonable enough, because when these institutions, these schools, are able to make so much money off the backs of these student athletes, black, white, or otherwise, and then sit there and make all this money off of them, and then you don't see a dime of it as an athlete, as a student athlete, that just makes no sense to me. It's literally like nonsense, in my opinion. And it smacks of the hypocrisy of the NCAA. I personally have a lot of issues with the NCAA, and we could probably talk about that on another episode. But just to kind of stay on point with Nick Saban's comments, my issue specifically with him directing his commentary at Jackson State and Deion Sanders, specifically, he, like I said in the quote, he specifically said Jackson State. He did not say Deion Sanders, but Deion Sanders did respond. Deion Sanders said that it was a lie. Deion Sanders also said that he wants to have a public conversation with Nick Saban. And because Nick Saban decided to make these comments publicly, that he wants to talk to him publicly about the statements that were made and challenge him on the things he said about Jackson State paying a high-end prospect who happened to be a cornerback, by the way. And for those of you who know who Deion Sanders is, who played in the NFL, one of the best corners to ever play in the NFL, you would think that if you are a high school football recruit going into college, that you would, if you play the corner position, wouldn't you go to the guy who is widely recognized as the best to ever play the position? I mean, that just makes sense to me. Y'all, you tell me. I mean, that just kind of seems like common sense, right? Like, if I want to be a great podcaster, if I want to be a great content creator, you know who I'm going to talk to? Other great content creators, other great podcasters. Why would I go to somebody who's not one of the best at what they do? It just doesn't make sense, right? Again, I don't understand. Like, I guess I kind of get where Nick Saban was going because of the whole thing with the NCAA and the issue that they run into with student athletes wanting to transfer and things like that, because he also brought that up as well. That was one of the points he made. That was one of the quotes in his press conference when he made this entire soliloquy and everything, answering questions. But again, I just don't understand why there's an issue when, and I'm gonna take this a little left, so y'all just kind of follow with me here. I don't understand why there's such a problem when Dion Sanders, who ever since he's gotten to Jackson State University, has literally risen the profile of that HBCU. And if we're being honest, I was having this conversation in Twitter Spaces earlier, and I spoke on the fact that I don't understand why all of a sudden all these coaches in these different programs, all of a sudden have an issue with these athletes who are making money off of their name, image, and likeness, and are basically using that to their advantage so that these institutions, these PWIs and these HBCUs are given a fair shake and kind of evening the playing field, because now it's not just about which kind of exposure I can get. It's not just about the history or the legacy of the program. Now it's, okay, where am I going to be able to make the most money? I don't think that's such a terrible thing. And if we're being honest, behind closed doors, I guarantee you that a lot of schools like an Alabama, schools like a Auburn, schools like a Florida State or a Clemson, other schools who have found ways to get recruits and have top recruiting classes year after year after year in college football. Like, why is it all of a sudden now that the playing field has been leveled to some degree that all of a sudden you guys want to pout about the fact that guys are basically using their name and image and likeness to decide where they want to go to school? It just smacks of first world problems and complaining. And I think what's ironic and hilarious to me is the fact that Nick Saban, you had the #2 recruiting class. Like, what's your issue? What's your problem? What was the point of you bringing that up? Like, what was the point of you, like, blasting Jackson State which again, Dion Sanders, is refuting that statement. He's refuting that they paid him $1 million. And then you also look at the fact that Jimbo Fisher, whose comments in response to Nick Saban I have not read or listened to yet. But I know that he has responded. I just don't understand the point. Like, I really don't. I think that at the end of the day, it is what it is. Like, if you don't like it, then go out there and recruit your butt off like you have been doing. Like, you literally have an unlimited reach, Nick Saban. It's not like you're limited as to who you can recruit. You have built such a program that you can convince guys to come. And I thought it was interesting that he brought up the fact that, oh, you got guys who grew up in Alabama and they're from Alabama, and all of a sudden now, like, they grew up wanting to go to Alabama, but now it's about how much money they can make. And, well, you're damn right. A lot of these guys coming into school don't come from the best backgrounds. Like, they want to make money. And now the NCAA has afforded them that opportunity by creating the name, image, and likeness. And I don't understand, like, what's your deal? I don't get it. Like, I honestly, like, I need somebody, if you can comment and maybe give me your thoughts. I don't understand what the big deal is. And I don't understand why Nick Saban felt the need to gatekeep for the NCAA, when the NCAA, if anything, needs to be criticized. They don't need to be gatekept. Nobody needs to protect them or shield them. They've put themselves in this position of dealing with some of the criticism and some of the harsh words that come their way. It's because this is their own fault. They made this bed, they're gonna have to lay in it. So those are my thoughts on that. I personally did not care for what was said. I really didn't like it. And one last quote real quick, just from this conference, that I want to bring up. Nick Saban also mentioned that, and I quote, "We have a rule right now that says you cannot use name, image, and likeness to entice a player to come to your school." Okay. So that's a rule. And I'm assuming that's a rule for the NCAA. He did not provide as much context as to specifically if that's just for Alabama or if that's for the NCAA. But I think what's funny about that statement is the fact that, again, behind closed doors, backdoor deals, You cannot tell me that a lot of these guys who chose to go to certain schools didn't get some backdoor deals, some deals under the table. I refuse to believe otherwise. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the Nick Saban commentary. But thank you again for tuning in to this week's episode of The Unathletic. Once again, please like, share, and subscribe the video. Also, hit that notification button so that you don't miss out on any content from the podcast. Please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at CJ The Unathletic. Again, that's at CJTheAthletic. All right. And then again, if you guys want to comment and interact with me in the comments, I love to respond back to you, and I definitely will. I appreciate you all for tuning in. I will see y'all next week. Peace.